Welcome in this morning on the Maize and Blue Review. Dennis Fithian with you here, and it is great to talk some basketball with the former Wolverine and Valley Sports Detroit studio analyst Tim McCormick, who joins us on the line. Good morning, Tim. How are you?
Good morning. You made my day by starting out with some Zap and Roger Troutman, more bounce to the ounce. That takes me right back to being a junior in college. So thank you for that.
Well, while we're throwing out some thank yous, thank you. I always, people ask me, like, when did I become a Michigan fan? And I don't football. I don't really remember the 70s. I might remember a player or two, and Anthony Carter. But your Michigan basketball team that went to the NIT. I was in high school in Detroit, and I loved Antoine Jobert was everything. The judge. And then when he went to Michigan, and your team was like the first team that I followed, and it was awesome. I mean, going back to then, now that was a great run that you guys had that year.
We had a pretty good team. Eric Turner was an All-Big Ten player. Roy Tarpley was just starting to come into his own, becoming an All-American. And that was before the NCAA had 64 teams. So we actually tied for third place in the Big Ten. We lost the last day of the season at Northwestern in overtime, which in hindsight, it worked out pretty well because we had a nice run in the NIT. We beat some pretty good teams. We beat Marquette and Wichita State with Xavier McDaniel and Virginia Tech with Del Curry. And then we blew out Notre Dame in Madison Square Garden for the NIT championship. So that was a great memory.
Yeah, it always depends on how old you are, but really, I was looking back, your 10-year career there in the NBA and where it went and how it started. It's like Magic and Bird were clashing there. Jordan was on his way up. The Pistons were, skyrocketing there, and that really was. I mean, the NBA was absolutely blossoming there, and in the 70s, it wasn't even, the games weren't even prime time. I don't even think the finals. So, I mean, you got in there, and the stock, man, shot up.
I felt really blessed to play when I did. My first 5 years went exceptionally well. I was mostly a starter. I had a chance on a nightly basis to go head-to-head with Kareem and Moses Malone and Brad Daugherty and Patrick Ewing and Olajuwon, and the list goes on and on. It seems like everybody had an elite center, maybe except for my team. But to go head to head with those guys and the great teams with the Sixers and Dr. J and the Lakers and the Celtics and the Pistons, it was just really exciting time to be an NBA player and to live your dream.
Yeah, I loved it. I want to take you back to Saturday up in East Lansing.
Why? No, can't do that.
Well, let me take you to the first half then, because there's a lot of good things. If we were watching the tape, you would look and say, man, Michigan, they brought their A game. They were competing. This one looked like it was going to go down to the last few minutes. The last few minutes of the first half, though, Michigan State really started perking up, and they carried that into the second half. Michigan was not able to do that.
I thought Michigan was ready to go. I thought their first half was very strong. They competed. They didn't close really well, and that's a really important ingredient of good teams, being able to close the half. And at halftime, I don't know what was said. I don't know where energy went, but it was a completely different team. I had a unique perspective because I was broadcasting the St. Bonaventure game for NBC Sports. And so I watched the first half pretty close, and the second half, my broadcast was going on. So I followed the score. And then seeing how they collapsed, I rewatched the second half when I got home, and it was startling to me how poor defensively Michigan's fundamentals were. There was a play that really stood out to me that told the tale. Michigan made a three. I think it was Kobe Buffkin to cut the lead to 12 points with 10 minutes to go. And I thought, okay, let's see what the response is. And Michigan State threw the ball a couple times back and forth, and Gabe Brown caught it at the top of the key. He's a left-hander. You've got to know that. I mean, he's their top scorer. And he just had a straight line drive right to the basket for a layup. Nobody helped. Nobody forced him to his right hand. And then the very next trip, Eli misses a wide open three badly. And on defense, Terrence Williams and I think it was Caleb Houston, rather than protect the paint in transition, they both ran out to the 3-point line on the right side to cover Max Christie, and they left Joey Hauser wide open for an uncontested layup. And I thought, if that could happen once or twice per half, you'd be upset, but you could understand it. But it happened over and over again. And I do think part of the problem, Dennis, is that Michigan is playing with two centers. Musa and Hunter are both centers, and Caleb Houston is more of a power forward than he is a small forward. So Michigan is really big. And if you don't use that size to your advantage, then it's a disadvantage. And I think pick and roll defense-wise, perimeter defense-wise, Michigan is just not good enough because they're so big. Also, Devontae Jones and Eli Brooks have to be able to score the ball. They were both in single digits. Some of those points came late when the game was already decided. So those are the flaws that I see from Michigan.
Yeah, those are all great points to make. Another thing that stood out to me is that, credit Michigan State, and it's something maybe Michigan can work on, is when, you mentioned Michigan and Hunter Dickinson. You knew Michigan wanted to get the big man the touches and keep throwing it to him. And Michigan State, they didn't do it so much in the first half, but whether they were sitting on those entry passes or just waiting, if you don't make it, have the great angle and you don't have that pass going into a strong, they deflected or absolutely, stole a few of those. And I thought that ignited Michigan State's break and really got them going as well there in the second half.
Well, it's that, but I believe that Juwan Howard, when he watched the film, was very satisfied with the production of the post game. Musa was very active on the offensive glass, generating second chances. I think that Hunter played like an all Big Ten star. He was great. But the problem is that when you miss 16 or 17 threes, those all act as outlet passes. A missed three is going to bounce out near the 3-point line, and that can really jumpstart your fast break. Michigan State with 28 fast break points, that's a big number. And when you compare to what Michigan had, it's a huge number and one of the biggest differences in this game.
Hey, Tim, Juwan Howard spoke after the game, talked about more fight with his team, and you kind of explained those things. But I'm sure you get asked, because of the preseason expectations, what about Michigan this year? And there's been a little bit of grumbling, that I've found, which, you'll get when you have preseason expectations like this. But I go back and tell people the first 2 years, just, the program that you can see what Juwan established and where he had it going. So even if, and the season's not over here, they've played 18, they've got 11, maybe 12 if they get a reschedule. And if they go 8-4 in those games, I mean, that's all possible if they play more like the first half than the second half. But I mean, how are you explaining it to people that ask you about Michigan basketball and this season?
There's a lot that you brought up there, Dennis. First of all, preseason wise, I bought into the hype too, and I made a big mistake. I studied these players based on highlight videos. I watched Devontae Jones at Coastal Carolina, and I thought, wow, he's exactly what they need. He's going to be a better player than Mike Smith. He does this and that. Well, the problem is that in the Sun Belt, you don't play with a center. And now all of a sudden, a big part of his game at Coastal Carolina was just transition points that were easy, driving to the lane. There was no big man clogging up the middle. He seems really frustrated playing with Hunter Dickinson. Not anything that Hunter's doing, but it just takes away a big part of his game. And he's reluctant to shoot threes. And so I overvalued Devontae Jones. He's a good player, and he's had some good games, but he can be taken away, and that's what Michigan State did. Also, with Musa and Caleb Houston, both really good players. But when you watch their highlight videos, all we see are their greatest plays ever. The lob dunks and the plays in transition. They're coming along. They're both probably going to be, first round draft picks at some point in the NBA draft, but they've got a long way to go. And the fact that they're sort of, playing out of position, so to speak, makes it really hard. Like, they just never left Caleb, and there was nothing that he could do. So I think we overvalued them, but they still are so young. They've got a chance to grow.
Yeah, I was I don't want to say like you, but I looked at the preseason and people asked me, and I thought, man, sky's the limit for this team when you start to take a look at it. And I thought that like Gabe Brown, like he's been pretty good, in his years at Michigan State, but a senior, you almost expect, like you've seen it a million times, like, oh, guys are playing their best basketball, and really, and Michigan with they had Brandon Johns going back against Michigan State. There's nothing against that, really, any guys in particular, but Nunez, I know, he was a shooter. He's a senior. It was his last time. I was thinking, hey, Michigan could get something from those guys, or the freshmen that went to sophomores. And, Zeb Jackson has had some issues, and not with the team right now. And you mentioned Terrence Williams, and you could say, hey, maybe you're expecting a little bit more from him. And then you talked about Devontae Jones, and then you go and you can still talk about some others that you would say, hey, maybe you'd expect a little bit more from them, like Caleb Houston. And that's like 6 guys, and really you just can't afford all of that. 1 or 2 it's probably going to happen, but when you get 6 of those things where you don't get where maybe what you were expecting before, I mean, that all kind of puts them where they're at right now.
Yeah, it's a challenge to try to quantify that. I know that growing up in the state of Michigan, I loved the Michigan State rivalry. It was the biggest game that I ever played in. I know Leslie Rockymore and Eric Turner, and I mean, those guys, Roy Tarpley, they all felt the same way. When I look at Michigan State's roster, Gabe Brown's a senior. This means everything to him. And Tom Izzo has always emphasized the Michigan State rival more than any other. I mean, he's at a fever pitch a week before this game. And I just don't know, because Michigan has so many young guys that don't fully understand it. Hunter does, because he's played Michigan State. But I think that Musa and Caleb and Devontae, and they weren't really ready for a 40-minute fight and what it would take to win in that building. But once again, I do think there's potential on this team. They've got a long way to go, and the clock is ticking.
Tim, if I close you out with 2 real quick ones, you think Michigan makes the tournament? If you had to guess right now, I mean, they got to go 8-4. I mentioned those 12 games. If they get that Michigan State one rescheduled, and it would depend a lot on if they get some signature wins in there and everything else. But if they went 8-4, that would put them 4 games above 500, which I think is one of the standards that selection committee looks at, along with that net ranking and everything, which still isn't that bad for Michigan. But all that being said, the factors and everything else, I mean, if you give me a yes or no, what would you say?
I would say yes, but it's a perilous situation, and there's a lot of mediocrity throughout college basketball this year, and Michigan has a chance to get a lot of those Indiana at Assembly Hall type of wins, and it's easy to say, oh, they're not going to get in because they lost, because not Michigan State made them look bad, but then all of a sudden, if they beat Purdue on the road, that changes everything. So they need some signature wins. They definitely need to take care of Nebraska at home in games like that. I just feel like at the end, it's going to come down to a Big Ten tournament game, playing Minnesota on the first day and having to win that game. I do think that they ultimately will.
All right, and the final thing is about the Pistons here. It reminded me, you got a nice home slate this week with the Pelicans, T-Wolves, and Celtics. I'm sure you'll be sitting up there by Mickey York, and we'll be enjoying the coverage here. And it reminded me when you were talking about watching the first half, and then you had something to do. I was watching the football, but I was checking in. Like here, the Pistons, they can't get down 15, and then Cade Cunningham's got a goose egg at the half, but you check the final score, and here he is with a triple double and everything. And then last Tuesday he had 34. I mean, the Cade Cunningham, man, this is this guy's the real deal, right?
He is, and I love the pace of play that he plays at. His jump shot is so much better than it was at the beginning of the season. He can score in transition. His mid-range is nice. He gets to the rim, and he can get very hot and streaky from 3. His teammates like playing with him, and I just feel like there's an opportunity to add 2 really good pieces. If they could get a young up-and-coming star for Jeremy Grant and then get in the top 3 of next summer's NBA draft, then all of a sudden you're in business. It still will take 2 or 3 years for them to mature and to maybe be able to fight in the, I would guess, the top 4 of the East. Then all of a sudden that's pretty exciting.
It's pretty exciting. Just I was concentrating on what you had to say for this interview, but I just started looking around there at your background. Man, we could spend an hour or 2 hours just talking about each piece of memorabilia and pictures that you have back there. And maybe one day we'll be able to do that. Really appreciate your time, Tim. Look forward to seeing you on TV, and I always value what you have to say about Michigan. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, always good talking to you, Dennis. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. There he is, Tim McCormick.